So Ben, we've got this series of 12 videos about assessment literacy. Tell me more about them.
Yeah, I think there's been growing discussion, I think, in English language teaching and indeed teaching in general about the teachers' need to be aware of assessment literacy. And what is assessment literacy? Assessment literacy, basically, understanding how assessment works.
But don't teachers understand that already?
Well, yes, they do to a certain extent, and yes, they are assessing students all of the time. But to give an example, when I was a teacher, I was doing one particular type of exam class, and I thought my students were going to do very well in the writing element of this exam class. All the examples of the writing I got from the students was really good. But then when they took the exam, their grade in the writing was far worse than I thought it should be. I didn't really understand why, and it wasn't until I became an examiner, an assessor for that particular board, that I realised I'd been training the students on the wrong thing. I didn't really understand how the exam worked. I thought I did, and I was a fairly effective teacher, I thought. But in that respect of understanding, what's the exam looking for? Why is it assessing certain things? I didn't really understand that. And as a result, my students didn't do as well as perhaps they should have done. So yes, I think teachers know about it, but I think they could know more about it. And so these videos will be introducing a variety of areas, 12 different areas in fact, about assessment literacy. They're not designed to be the answer for everything. They're not designed to be the only thing you need to know. They're simply an introduction. And the videos, as people will see, are divided into 5 sections. Each video about 10 to 12 minutes long. Each section about 2 minutes long. So if you want, you can watch a whole 12-minute piece, or you can just watch the 2-minute chunks, just to give you a focused, bite-sized introduction to an area of assessment literacy. And at the end of the videos, there's also a further reading section, so that will enable teachers, or anyone in fact, to find out a little bit more information about that topic, should they want to.
Is assessment literacy something students should know about, or is this simply just for teachers?
No, you're absolutely right. Students should definitely know about this. Now, if we think about a student taking an exam, they need to know what they're being assessed on. And I think the best exams are transparent. They say, we're going to assess you on these points, you get, this is how it's marked, this is how the decisions are arrived at. Because if students don't know what they're being assessed on, then they might be preparing the wrong thing. And it sounds like we're just setting up students to fail. We don't, certainly in language testing and most testing, we don't want to find out what students don't know. We don't want to trick them in any way. A good assessment should be an assessment which just identifies what students do know. And we just want to make sure we're providing the right conditions for students. So I think if students know what's in an exam, how it's marked, why it's being assessed in the way it is, and also how those exam learning outcomes or assessment outcomes are linked to perhaps their lives outside of the classroom, then a good exam could be a really positive force for change for students and driving forward their learning and making them a nice independent learner.
Do you think it can help to motivate them?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think if it's a good test, I think if there's a good test and students see how it's being assessed and how that can link into their outside lives, then really motivating. Conversely, however, if it's a rubbish test and students see that, then I think naturally they're going to be demotivated. So that, I think, drives the importance of making sure that those who choose tests for their students choose the right tests for their students.
Does it make a difference to students' confidence if they're aware of the assessment literacy and what they need to do, or do you think it might frighten them and put them off?
I think if I take my own example of when I was doing a teaching exam, and it was a 3-hour exam, and I had to write certain essays about different elements of pedagogy. Luckily, in the exam, it said, this exam is assessing X, Y, and Z. So, okay, I know that in this section I'm being assessed on X, Y, and Z. This next section I'm being assessed on A, B, C, whatever. it gave me the confidence that, okay, I know about X, Y, and Z, and this is the bit where I apply my knowledge of X, Y, and Z, as opposed to A, B, or C, which is for another part. So, yeah, I think it certainly would build confidence, yeah.
So what's the teacher's role in this? Can the teacher really use this as part of their teaching, or is it something they're going to struggle with?
I think there's two elements for a teacher to consider. One, they need to help their students be aware of what's in an exam, why something is in an exam, and how it can help them, how those assessment outcomes for the exam can help them in whatever purpose they're doing, what's it doing. So that's the first thing teachers need to do for the reasons I just gave for the students. The other side of it is to do with their own teaching, because teachers need to know about what's in an exam for their own teaching, to make sure that they're not teaching students the wrong thing. The example I gave right at the beginning in the overview about teaching my poor students the wrong things for the exam, for this writing test, is an example. So teachers need to be aware of what's in the exam, why it's being assessed, but I think more broadly also the wider assessment methodology, because understanding if there is, let's say, a communicative purpose for an exam will help them with their own teaching, and it will help them align their own teaching objectives that they have in their lesson plans to what then the activities they do in the class, which will then support the students with any particular skills they're developing, which then will move on to developing the skills they need to pass a test. And if the test is a good test, and it's developing the skills they need for real life, then that can only be a positive thing.
So you're saying it has quite a positive backwash effect into teaching and learning if teachers and students both are aware of the aims of each exam?
Exactly. I think it's really important that teachers always know what they're doing and why they're doing it. To give another example from my own teaching experience as a younger teacher, we had to give our students progress tests every month. And so, you're teaching long hours, you don't have time to make tests from scratch. So I would tend to just use the progress tests which were in the course books that we used, or the workbooks of the course books. I'd just copy a few bits, stick them together, photocopy, done, there's my test. And I was using a range of multiple choice, short answer, STEM and answer, long answer questions, without really appreciating the effect it was having on the students. What I was actually assessing, whether there was both content validity, constructive validity. Yes, it had face validity because it was a test, but I really didn't understand that. And I think, again, my students suffered as a result of me not fully grasping the construct validity of the test that I was then giving them. They mostly aligned, but not always. So I think there's an example of how it can really benefit teachers.
Yes, and I think that as teachers we've kind of grown up with tests just being tests. We don't actually know what's behind them and why.
I suppose you might link in, perhaps at a long end of it, the kind of apprenticeship of observation. It's like, these are tests, this is how I was tested when I was a kid, this is how I'm now going to test you, without fully understanding why. And I think it's a teacher's responsibility to really get to the bottom of that question. Why are we doing a test like this? Why, if it's a multiple choice, and there's very good reasons to using multiple choice sometimes, why am I using a multiple choice as opposed to STEM and answer? Why am I using multiple choice as opposed to long answer questions? So yeah, it's all part and parcel, I think, of good teaching and indeed good assessment.
So is this simply for students and managers, this awareness of assessment literacy, or do you think, students and teachers?
Well, it's funny, you preempted,
yes.
I suppose, what I was probably about to say. Managers, I think, need to be aware of assessment literacy as well, and the purpose of tests. And I'll give some examples for this. Because it's often managers that choose the tests, maybe department managers or school managers, directors of studies, that choose tests for learners. And if they understand the purpose of the tests, if they know what the outcomes of those tests are, they'll know what data they're going to get back from their students or from the results of those tests. When I was working previously in the UK state sector, and so you'd have managers who would say, okay, we're going to get this test because this is a test that we've bought from whichever awarding organisation. And then they'd expect the students to have ABCD skills. But the test that they bought or used didn't assess those ABCD skills. So that meant that the teachers were having to teach, ideally, to the test, but it wasn't what the managers were expecting in terms of the outcomes for the department or the overall outcomes for the students. So if managers don't really understand what the purpose of a test is, what the outcomes of a test are, and how those outcomes are going to fit into a broader departmental or school objective for getting, in the case that I was working in, it was a further education college, so the outcomes for getting students into work. If they don't see that that test does meet those outcomes, then there's an issue there. So I think managers really need to have an understanding about, a more global understanding about where tests fit in the wider educational structure.
Well, surely that's really quite a difficult thing. It's a very academic thing for somebody who may be a commercial manager of a school.
I think the basic concept isn't difficult. Yes, you're right. I think if you really go into the nuts and bolts of the academics and really dig down deep, yes, it is complicated. But if you just look at it as saying, well, what do I want students to achieve when they leave this school? What level, what competency do I want them to have? Then it's just a case of looking at a test and saying, does this test enable my students to have these results? If it doesn't, choose a different test. There are numerous awarding organisations available. Each of them have a huge variety of tests, and I think the manager therefore just has to have this global understanding. What do I want my students to have at the end of it? What do I want my school, my teachers, to be preparing my students for? So I think at that level, it's fairly straightforward. Yes, you can go into the details, and yes, there's lots of studies that people can research into, but I think that's one side of it. So it depends how far managers want to get into it.
Is there anything else with reference to assessment literacy we need to talk about that you think is important?
Yes, I think the final area I'd like to mention in terms of who needs to be aware of assessment literacy are policymakers. And who do I mean when I say policymakers? People perhaps at a higher level than the managers, because yes, in some respects you get managers choose tests, but policymakers I think also look at the data from tests. Managers do as well, but if we take the PISA rankings as an example, so the UK government, and indeed many governments, get very excited about league tables and where the UK is in this league table, are they higher or lower, who's doing better in maths or who's doing better in English. And if you look at the types of exam which are being referenced in the PISA rankings, we might not say that there's great constructive alignment to actual outcomes that students need in real life. And indeed, in many cases, what's being taught in the classroom. So policymakers, if they're looking at data and they're making decisions based on data, they need to be aware of what kinds of data exams are generating. And if you've got multiple choice questions, that's generating a certain amount of data. But as we know, multiple choice questions aren't the best way to assess things. A quick example, if you've got someone baking a cake, a multiple choice teaching or a test that assesses people how to bake a cake, or multiple choice exam, do I put the cake in at 120 degrees, 150 degrees, 180 degrees, etc. Wouldn't be 120, you'd have a terrible cake, it'd go flat. But if a multiple choice exam wouldn't do that. The best way to assess baking a cake is probably to watch someone baking a cake, and maybe to taste it if it's a tasty cake. So I think the policymakers need to be aware of that, and the data that's generated from an observation of cake baking to the data generated to multiple choice is going to be completely different. And how you align that and compare those different types of data with data from different schools, different school districts, different subject areas, or different countries, as in case with the PISA rankings, well, that needs to be understood. And I think that's why policymakers need to have a very global level of what's understood at the micro level of assessment, what's actually being done. I don't think they need to know absolutely everything, but an awareness would certainly be helpful.
So some of these ideas we read reports in the news where people in business and in the workplace are saying we need young people who have ability to work in teams, to cooperate, to be creative, to think for themselves, to solve problems.
Yeah.
So the external validity of the exams these students are taking means these students are arriving without these skills. So you're saying that an exam could actually promote those sorts of...
It could. I mean, recently in the UK, there's been a focus on developing students' grammatical awareness. So you have 7-year-olds having to identify a subordinate clause over or different types of relative clause, and a variety of other kind of quite complex grammatical areas. Now, being able to name a parts isn't what these workplace people are saying. So they want people who have these skills, those skills. They don't want someone to say this is a reduced relative clause, this is a different type of...
Yes, it's an adverbial phrase.
Exactly, and so on. And I think if you have, at the government level, people saying, well, we need to do this because this is what needs to be known, is the naming of parts what needs to be known. Because that kind of test generates data that says these people now know these naming of parts, or don't know the naming of parts. But is that really what the students need in terms of their life skills? So having someone, a policymaker, that's aware of the end goal, and being aware of what's actually happening in a test, I think is fundamental for anyone who's making any of those kinds of decisions.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, but hopefully that gives you a basic idea.
Yes.
But these videos, I got a bit excited at some points, but these videos will hopefully give a basic awareness of some of these issues that we're talking about. Now there's so much to deal with in terms of assessment literacy, but these videos hopefully will be a starter, just to get people on the road to having an understanding about it.
They sound very interesting.
I recommend you watch them.
I shall.
Okay, thank you very much.